During a 10-day cruise across Europe with my fiancée, she vanished for 3 days. I finally found her in the ship's jacuzzi, laughing with some guy from England who introduced himself as Crypto Millionaire. The first 3 days of the cruise felt like something out of a travel commercial. Blue water stretched in every direction, the sun cut diamonds over the waves, and the air smelled faintly of champagne and sunscreen. I thought it would be a fresh start for us, Riley and me. 10 days through Europe, Barcelona to Santorini. A celebration before the wedding. But even before we left port, something in her had changed. She spent more time staring at her phone than talking to me. Every sunset, every dinner, her attention drifted somewhere else. She'd laugh at messages she never showed me. When I asked who it was, she'd say it was work. But Riley hadn't worked in months. On day 4, I woke up to an empty bed. The sheets were cold. Her bag was still on the chair, her sandals by the door. Her phone sat on the nightstand, locked, battery almost dead, airplane mode on. She never went anywhere without it. The balcony door was closed, and her keycard was still on the counter. I searched every corner of that cabin, even though I already knew she wasn't there. The air felt stale, like it had been sealed too long. Outside, the hallway smelled of perfume and cleaning chemicals. I asked the steward if he'd seen her. He smiled too quickly, said maybe she went to breakfast. I checked the dining area, the spa, the pool deck. Nothing. By noon, I'd gone through every deck and every lounge, asking staff who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, a receptionist told me she was on a shore excursion, one of the local wine tastings in Corsica. But the itinerary didn't list her name. I showed them her photo, asked again. They checked their system, then whispered something to each other before the woman at the desk smiled and said, "Perhaps a private tour, sir." Something about her tone felt rehearsed. By sunset, the ship left port without her, at least as far as I could tell. I stood on the balcony as the coastline faded, wondering if I'd lost my mind. I didn't even know where to call. Her phone had no signal, and the cruise line claimed passenger privacy laws stopped them from sharing location data. They told me to enjoy the amenities. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound, the creak of wood, the hum of the engines, felt like a whisper behind my back. Around 2 a.m., I wandered up to the observation deck. A few passengers were still drinking, laughing, and I noticed a tall man standing near the railing. He was hard to miss. Tanned, expensive watch, white shirt open halfway down his chest. He had that careless confidence of someone who never worried about rules. He looked right at me when I passed. I didn't recognize him, but something about him felt familiar, like I'd seen him from a distance before. He smiled, raised his glass slightly, and said, "Rough night, mate?" His accent was British, smooth, deliberate. I ignored him and kept walking. When I looked back a moment later, he was gone. The next morning, the crew announced a masquerade gala for that night, a formal event on the top deck. I almost skipped it, but sitting alone in that cabin felt worse. The entire ship transformed for the party. Velvet drapes, string lights, masked couples dancing under the Mediterranean sky. The music echoed faintly over the water. I stood near the bar, pretending to drink. That's when I saw her. A flash of gold fabric and dark hair. She was dancing with the British man from the railing. Same height, same build, same easy posture. Her mask covered half her face, but I'd have known that laugh anywhere. It cut through everything around me. She tilted her head toward him, whispering something close to his ear. He laughed, then kissed her hand like it was a performance. For a moment, I couldn't move. It was her. The same hair, same voice, but everything in me wanted to believe it wasn't. I set down my glass, pushed through the crowd. By the time I reached the dance floor, she was gone. The man too. The rest of the night was a blur of corridors and empty rooms. I checked the upper decks, the lower lounges, even the staff entrances. Nothing. Around midnight, I returned to our cabin and found the lights flickering. The bathroom mirror was fogged over as if someone had just showered. My heart started pounding, but the air was cold, the floor dry. I looked around. Nothing was missing. Only one thing was new. A folded towel on the bed, shaped into a swan like the ones housekeeping left every morning. Except this one wasn't from housekeeping. A phone charger was coiled neatly around its neck. Riley's charger, the one that had been in her purse. That was when I realized she'd been there while I was searching. I ran out to the hallway, but it was empty. A man passed me in a tuxedo mask and nodded politely. I almost followed him, then stopped. I was shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat on the floor. I must have drifted off sometime before dawn. When I woke, there was a vibration on the table beside me. The cabin phone screen blinked once. No ringtone, just a new message notification from the ship's internal system. It wasn't possible for guests to message cabins directly, only the front desk or emergency alerts. The text read, "Don't look." That was all. No sender, No timestamp. I sat there staring at those 2 words until the text disappeared from the screen. I tried to call the front desk, but the line cut after 1 ring. The display went blank, like someone had disabled it. I checked outside. The hallway was silent. Later that morning, I went to the upper deck again, searching for anyone who might have seen Riley. The British man was there, lounging near the pool, sunglasses on, talking to a group of passengers. When he noticed me, he smiled again, the same way he had the night before, as if we'd shared a secret. Something inside me snapped. He looked too calm, too comfortable. I didn't know his name then, but every part of me knew he was connected to her disappearance. And from that moment, I stopped believing Riley was just avoiding me. Whatever she was doing, she wasn't doing it alone, and she didn't want me to find out. 3 mornings passed before I saw her again. 3 mornings of wandering the ship, pretending to care about buffets and guided tours while my stomach twisted itself into knots. I hadn't eaten properly since the night of the gala. Every corridor felt like a trap. Every laugh, every perfume trail, a reminder that Riley was somewhere else on this floating city and didn't want to be found. On the 7th morning, she appeared. It happened on the upper deck, near the infinity pool where the horizon looked endless. She was there, sitting in the jacuzzi, steam curling around her, head tilted back in laughter. Across from her was the same man I'd seen before, the one with the British accent and the kind of tan that came from wealth, not sunlight. I froze halfway up the steps. The scene looked rehearsed. 2 flutes of champagne, a silver ice bucket, her hair perfectly styled like she'd never been missing at all. He noticed me first. He leaned closer to her, said something I couldn't hear, and she turned, her smile fading just a little when our eyes met. The color drained from my face before I could speak. She blinked, whispered something to him, then looked away, as if I were some stranger ruining her day. He stood up, water dripping down his shoulders, and reached for a towel like I didn't exist. Then he laughed, light, easy, practiced, and said, "You must be the fiancée she mentioned. Quite the view up here, isn't it?" His voice cut like a knife through the wind. I didn't answer. I just stared at Riley, waiting for her to say anything. She didn't. He offered his hand as if we were old friends. "Sebastian Kerr," he said. "From London." That was my first time hearing his name. I didn't shake his hand. He smiled wider, unfazed. "Riley's told me all about you. You're the one who hates parties, right?" Her expression tightened. She finally spoke, voice calm. Too calm. "Callum, I wasn't feeling well the other night. Sebastian helped me get some air." "You're overreacting." She looked right at me and lied like she'd been practicing. Sebastian excused himself with an exaggerated wink, grabbing his robe and sauntering toward the private cabins. I wanted to follow him, but something in Riley's face told me the truth wouldn't come from confrontation. Not yet. We walked along the railing in silence. She said she'd been in the spa wing, sleeping most of the time, recovering from motion sickness. I asked why her phone was in our cabin. She said it died. I asked who sent the message on the cabin phone. She didn't answer. I stopped walking. The ocean stretched endlessly on both sides, but I felt trapped. She glanced around nervously, then lowered her voice. "Please, Callum, you're making a scene." That was when I realized I'd lost her. Not to some stranger, not even to Sebastian, but to something bigger, something that had started long before this cruise. Later that evening, I saw them again. The ship's nightclub pulsed with low light and expensive perfume. Sebastian was at the bar, buying drinks for a circle of passengers who looked hypnotized by his charm. Riley stood beside him, smiling at his jokes. When I entered, she stiffened but stayed where she was. He noticed me and raised his glass in mock salute. I wanted to walk up and smash it in his face. Instead, I sat across the room, watching. For hours, they held court, laughing, trading stories about crypto investments and luxury properties. He flashed a sleek black card and paid for every round. At midnight, I watched her slip away from the group and head toward the private suites on deck 9. 10 minutes later, Sebastian followed. I didn't sleep that night either. Instead, I waited outside his deck in the shadows of the emergency stairwell. Around 2 a.m., I heard muffled laughter from inside his suite, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Then silence. When the door opened a few minutes later, Riley stepped out, clutching her heels, tiptoeing barefoot down the hall. She didn't notice me standing in the dark. The next morning, I went back when the hallway was quiet. His suite door was slightly ajar. Inside, the air smelled of citrus and cologne. A bottle of Dom Perignon sat half-empty beside a pile of poker chips. On the dresser were photos of passengers taken candidly. On deck, at dinner, by the pool. Among them, one of Riley, cropped neatly around her smile. Next to it, an open envelope held cash and several foreign credit cards. That's when it clicked. The way Riley avoided questions, the way the crew seemed reluctant to help, even the front desk woman's evasive smile. It wasn't random. This man wasn't just some flirt. He was someone important enough to make people nervous. That evening, I tried to talk to Riley privately in our cabin. She pretended everything was fine, told me I was paranoid. I asked why she was spending time with him, and she said she met him at the spa. Then she laughed, said he was harmless, just rich and bored. When I mentioned the photo I'd found, her eyes flickered, just once, but enough to confirm it. She said I shouldn't have gone through other people's things. Then she walked out, closing the door softly behind her, like she was tucking me in for the night. I didn't follow. I just sat there in the half-light, realizing I wasn't supposed to be a fiancé anymore. I was a mark. That night, as the ship passed the Italian coastline, the captain announced a private charity event hosted by distinguished guest Sebastian Kerr. Everyone was invited. I watched through the glass as he stood on stage in a white dinner jacket, speaking like a politician, promising to double donations for marine preservation. Riley stood near him, clapping, wearing a diamond necklace I'd never seen before. When the event ended, guests lined up to shake his hand, give him checks, hand over jewelry for auction pledges. He played the part perfectly, humble, magnetic, unstoppable. But as I watched, I noticed something strange. The donations weren't going to the ship's charity account. They were being routed to a different registry, a temporary one created only that morning. And Riley was the one recording each transaction on a tablet. I walked away before I did something stupid. In my room, I replayed everything in my head. The missing days, the message, the gala, the photos, the donations. There was no version of this that didn't end in disaster. I was engaged to someone who was either being manipulated or was manipulating everyone else. Near midnight, someone knocked. I opened the door expecting her. Instead, I found a small folded note on the floor, slipped under the doorframe. It was written in her handwriting. No greeting, no apology, just one line. Stay quiet tonight. I didn't sleep after that. I stood by the balcony, watching the lights of the French coast fade into darkness, knowing that whatever she was tangled in, I was now part of it too. And the next move would decide who got off this ship unscathed. The next morning, the sky over the Mediterranean was the color of ash. A thick fog clung to the decks, and the sea had gone oddly still. The kind of quiet that made you feel watched. Passengers moved slower, voices hushed. Maybe they felt it too, that something was brewing beneath all the luxury. By then, I wasn't sleeping at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Riley's face in that jacuzzi, laughing at something Sebastian said. It wasn't jealousy anymore. It was disbelief, that the person I thought I knew was capable of stepping so far out of herself that I couldn't recognize what she was anymore. That morning, she came back to the cabin. No knocking, no explanation. Just walked in as if the last 3 days hadn't happened. She looked radiant, a white sundress, perfect hair, expensive sunglasses that definitely weren't hers. She carried a small jewelry box. She said she bought me something. Inside was a silver cufflink with the cruise logo engraved on it. A peace offering. Except I noticed the box wasn't from the ship's boutique. It was from one of the private jewelry vendors on the lower deck, the ones that took only high-limit cards. I opened my banking app when she left for breakfast. $8,000 gone. I should have shouted. I should have ended it right there. But I needed to know what game she was playing and what part Sebastian had in it. By noon, word spread that a few guests were complaining about missing valuables. Bracelets, watches, even a wallet. I overheard 2 women whispering in the hallway about a British man who'd been bragging about a lucky poker night. They said he won big from a table of drunk investors. It clicked. The charity event the night before wasn't charity. It was cover. A performance to build credibility for the con. Riley wasn't just a bystander. She was the one making it believable. The charming fiancée. The proof that Sebastian wasn't alone or suspicious. At dinner, I sat near them. They didn't notice. She laughed, touched his arm, whispered something that made him smirk. He called her Angel. I didn't look away. I wanted her to see me there, to feel the weight of what she'd become. But she didn't even flinch. After dessert, Sebastian pulled a few men aside. Older, well-dressed, the kind who talked about returns and portfolios like hobbies. He invited them to a private game in the observation lounge. Just for fun, he said. Small buy-in. I followed from a distance. When I got there, 2 security guards stood by the door. Real security this time. Not his cronies. They didn't let me in. So I waited in the hallway, pretending to look at the art on the wall. Every few minutes, someone inside laughed too loud. Then the laughter turned forced, brittle. A man stormed out 30 minutes later, red-faced, muttering about rigged decks and missing chips. When the guards shifted position, I slipped in through the service entrance. Inside, the room smelled like cigars and stress. Sebastian was collecting chips, smiling like he owned the place. Riley sat beside him, scribbling numbers on a tablet. On the table were stacks of euros, a few watches, and one black credit card. Then I saw it, my own name on the transaction log. She'd charged something under my account. I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the screen before anyone noticed. When the game ended, Sebastian stood up and thanked the players for their generosity. The older men looked uneasy but nodded anyway. He had that hypnotic charm, the kind that made you believe the lie even while you knew it was one. As the guests left, Riley stayed behind, cleaning the table. I stepped forward, voice low enough to cut through her silence. She turned sharply, startled. I asked her what she was doing. She said it wasn't what it looked like. I told her I'd seen the transfer. She froze, her jaw tightening. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled. She said I wasn't supposed to see any of this, that she'd fix it, that it was temporary. When she realized I wasn't backing down, she whispered, "You don't understand who he is. Just stay quiet." But I did understand. Too well. The next night, the ship hosted another gala, this time docked off Marseille. The music was louder, the champagne colder, and the atmosphere heavier. I dressed up deliberately, same tuxedo as the first night, same mask, and decided to stop pretending. When Sebastian took the stage again to thank everyone for an unforgettable voyage, I stood from my table. My heart pounded hard enough that I could hear it over the orchestra. I walked toward him, slow but steady. The crowd parted a little. I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, that I'd like to thank him too. For stealing from the passengers, for using fake charity accounts, for charging stolen cards. The music died instantly. Sebastian stared at me, still smiling, but his eyes went flat. He said I must have had too much to drink. People laughed nervously. Riley's hand shook as she tried to pull me aside, whispering that I was embarrassing myself. I ignored her. I told the captain I had proof, photos, receipts, and the log from the observation lounge. I pulled my phone out and held up the screen. That's when one of the crew members stepped forward and said quietly to the captain, "He's telling the truth." The room turned into chaos. The captain called for ship security. Sebastian tried to leave, but 2 officers blocked the exit. He still smiled, even when they searched him and found 3 guest keycards and a wad of euros. Riley backed away slowly, hands trembling. She looked terrified, but not for him, for herself. The crowd started murmuring, words like fraud, arrest, scam. Some guests recognized their missing jewelry on the display table. It was no longer a party. It was a storm waiting to break. The captain ordered both of them taken to the private lounge for questioning. I followed behind, ignoring Riley's whispered pleas. When the door closed, Sebastian's mask dropped. The charm evaporated. He leaned back, staring at me with eyes that were almost bored. He said this wasn't personal, it was business. That everyone on this ship was chasing something they'd never get: wealth, youth, validation. He just gave them what they wanted to see. Then he looked at Riley and said, "Some people are just better at playing the part." I turned to her. She couldn't meet my eyes. And then she said it, the words that rewired everything I thought I understood. She said Sebastian wasn't her new lover. He was her ex-fiancé, the man she disappeared with 2 years before we met. The same man she swore she never saw again. The cruise, the ring, the engagement, all of it had been part of a setup. Sebastian needed someone with access to a high-limit account and a clean name to legitimize his charity scam. Riley found me. She hadn't fallen in love. She'd followed instructions. The worst part was that she sounded almost relieved to say it. The captain stared at her in disbelief. I couldn't speak. It wasn't rage anymore. It was a kind of emptiness so deep it hummed in my bones. Sebastian leaned forward, voice low. "You were never the mark, mate. You were the insurance. In case she got caught." Security moved him to another room before I could react. Riley started sobbing, not out of guilt, but out of fear. She begged me to say she was innocent, that she was forced. But I'd seen the look on her face during the game, during the gala. That wasn't fear then. It was greed. When they took her away, she turned once more and said, "He'll find a way out. He always does." I didn't believe her, not yet. But that night, as the storm began rolling over the dark water, I started to realize she might be right. By the time the storm hit, the entire ship felt like it was holding its breath. The captain had ordered everyone back to their cabins. The once luxurious hallways now smelled of wet carpet and fear. Wind howled against the glass as rain hit in sharp bursts. Somewhere above, metal groaned like the ship itself was angry. I couldn't sleep, even after the officers escorted Sebastian and Riley to the lower deck holding room. My mind replayed her confession over and over, the way she said it like a weight had lifted. Not regret, release. I kept wondering if there was a moment I could have stopped it. Maybe back in Barcelona, when she seemed distracted. Maybe when I saw her dancing in the mask. But I'd mistaken deception for distance. I thought I was losing her emotionally, not realizing she'd already sold me out. At 2 a.m., lightning cracked across the sky, and the ship lurched violently. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. I stood by the window, watching the waves rise like black walls. Then, over the wind, I heard something metallic, a clang, like a heavy latch striking steel. I went into the corridor. It was empty, except for the emergency lights casting a red glow. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed. When I reached the lower deck, 2 officers were guarding the storage cabin where Sebastian and Riley were held. One looked half asleep. The other stared at the radio, static hissing. I asked if everything was secure. The sleepy one said yes, then turned toward the door and froze. The padlock was hanging open. The inside light was flickering, the small table overturned. Sebastian was gone. Riley was sitting in the corner, knees pulled to her chest, drenched in sweat, shaking. The window latch above her was broken clean off. Rain sprayed through the gap. One of the officers cursed into his radio, shouting for backup. The other started scanning the hallway. Riley looked up at me, eyes wide with terror. She said she didn't do it, that he had the keys hidden in his shoe, that he'd waited until the thunder masked the noise. She said he told her he wasn't going back to prison. They searched the deck, but it was useless. The storm swallowed everything. By dawn, the sea had calmed slightly, but there was no sign of Sebastian, not in the water, not on the cameras, not on any nearby radar. The captain declared an emergency report. 1 missing passenger, 1 accomplice detained. The tone in his voice wasn't anger anymore. It was disbelief. When we docked near Sicily that afternoon, the local authorities came aboard. They took Riley first. She didn't resist. Her hair was tangled, eyes bloodshot, like she hadn't slept either. As they led her past me, she stopped, her lips trembling. She asked if I believed her, if I believed she hadn't meant to hurt me. I said nothing. She started crying harder. One of the officers pulled her along, and she disappeared into the line of uniforms. I thought that would be the end of it. But the story didn't stop when I got off the ship. Back in London, the media latched onto the story. Crypto conman vanishes at sea. Headlines flooded everywhere. Sebastian Kerr, real name Samuel Kerrigan, wanted across multiple countries for fraud, money laundering, and offshore scams. He'd con people out of millions. The cruise was supposed to be his last job. Interpol reached out 2 weeks later. They asked for my statement again, this time for the Financial Crimes Division. They confirmed what I already suspected. Riley hadn't been a victim. She'd transferred several $100,000 into an offshore account under her maiden name 2 days before the cruise. But there was something else. They'd found partial prints from a life raft latch, hers and his, which meant she'd helped him escape before the storm worsened. A week later, the raft washed ashore near a small Sicilian fishing village. Inside were scattered clothes, an empty champagne bottle, and one of Sebastian's watches. No bodies. No sign of struggle. They found her, though, not far from the coast, half-conscious on a rocky inlet. She was alive, but barely. Dehydrated, delirious, sunburned. When the police brought her in, she refused to talk. She just kept repeating that he was alive, that he'd promised to come back. She was extradited to the UK 2 months later, charged with conspiracy to defraud, aiding escape, and identity fraud. Her lawyer argued coercion, manipulation, emotional abuse. The press painted her as the naive fiancée caught in the web of a master con artist. But I knew better. When the prosecutor asked if I'd testify, I hesitated. Not because I wanted revenge, because I needed to hear her say it in a courtroom, under oath, without the chance to hide behind charm. The trial lasted 3 weeks. She never once looked at me. When her sentence was read, 4 years, she just stared ahead, face expressionless. The judge called her intelligent, deliberate, and without remorse. I didn't stay for the end. After it was over, I sold the engagement ring and the cruise refund the company sent me. The money went to a victims foundation that helped people caught in financial scams. It wasn't charity, it was survival. If I didn't turn what happened into something meaningful, it would rot me from the inside out. I moved out of London. The city felt smaller now, the kind of place where every luxury had looked like a lie. I rented a small apartment in Brighton, near the sea. I told myself I needed quiet. But the truth was, I just couldn't stand looking at water without remembering her face disappearing into the fog. Some nights, I still woke to the sound of waves slapping against metal. It took a while before I could go near a harbor again. Then, 3 months after the verdict, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address, no postmark, just my name written in blue ink I recognized immediately. Inside was a single postcard. The photo showed an empty ocean under gray skies. On the back, in her handwriting, "The sea doesn't forget." Signed, S. There was no question who had sent it. I handed it to the authorities, but they couldn't trace it. No fingerprints, no postal code. Just that message, quiet, chilling, final. For a long time, I kept it locked away. Then, one morning, I took it to the pier, ripped it in half, and threw it into the water. The paper dissolved almost instantly, disappearing into the same current that once carried everything I thought I knew. I stood there for a while, watching the horizon. Somewhere out there, maybe Sebastian was alive, or maybe the sea had finally taken him. Either way, I wasn't afraid anymore. People always say betrayal changes you. They're right, but it doesn't just make you colder. It makes you sharper. It teaches you that some storms don't pass. You just learn to walk in the rain and keep your eyes open for the next wave. And sometimes, the only thing you can do is keep moving forward, because if you look back too long, the sea starts to look like home again.